you're the former Florida Speaker of the House. I mean, is that something you ever thought you'd actually be? Or
So I'll just be super candid between us, folks, and everyone listening to the podcast.
And there's a disagreement on whether or not to talk about fatherlessness, right?
That's right, yeah. And, there were some folks around the table who were like, I don't think we should do something. And I think at that moment, what I responded back with was, you know what, What's up, guys? Welcome to the Patros Podcast, where we are embracing healthy masculinity. This is a ministry of Man Up. My name is Allan, Pereira, and this is Jeff Ford. And today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about the intersection of fatherlessness and politics, how men who name the name of Christ should be thinking about key issues on the ballot this fall, and what it's like to be a follower of Christ at the highest levels of state government. To give us an insider's look on these issues, we're excited to have our former Florida Speaker of the House, Chris Sprowls, joining us on the podcast today. Yeah, it's great to be with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Yes. And you're the former Florida Speaker of the House, but I think of you first and foremost as a friend. I think of you secondly as just a man who loves God and who loves his family and who loves his country. And then I think third, although it's not too distant, but I mean, yes, the Florida Speaker of the House, which is an insane thing that I would know somebody who is that, and for you to actually be that. I mean, is that something you ever thought you'd actually be or want to be? Or
no, but I'm glad you think of it as third. That's a relief. That's a relief. No, I didn't, and I think that's how God works. But it was just a particular path that I took to serve, just like you all are taking a path to serve dads and fathers. So, but it was a really cool ride.
Yeah, it's awesome. So let's talk just a little bit about you, because people, if they don't know your name now, they're going to go Google it. But if they do know, they're kind of like, oh yeah, he's the Speaker of the House. But what about Chris Sprowls? What's your background, family like? How did you grow up? And I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, well, I grew up actually pretty close to where we are right now, in North Pinellas County in Tarpon Springs. My family moved here. We were real young. My dad was a retired New York City homicide detective, so I grew up on cop stories. On the way to school, my dad would, probably share me stories probably shouldn't have shared, at that age, looking back, right? But
that's awesome.
They were really cool stories to grow up on, and so we grew up here locally. I got involved in local politics really young, mostly because my parents talked about it at the dinner table. It was sort of conversation about, well, this is going on or that's going on.
So it's part of life.
Yeah, it was a part of life, right? It was just not, people say don't talk about politics and religion at the dinner table. We talked about politics.
That's all you talked about.
Yeah, it was like nothing else, right? It's like, what else is there?
Yeah. And nothing else really important.
Yeah, so we're talking about that stuff. So I got involved, really locally and went to school here, got involved politically, went to University of South Florida and then law school at Stetson. And then when I graduated, I told my dad, I think I'm going to the police academy, because my dad was a cop. And he's like, look, if you do that, your mother's going to leave me or something, because, she was a cop and they sort of knew the life. But I really felt strongly that I wanted to be, in the criminal justice space. So I went and I was a gang and homicide prosecutor for 7 years, Pinellas and Pasco County. And really it was my first real exposure to fatherlessness and the issues there. But, it was an amazing job. I loved every second of doing it. And in 2014, I ran for an open seat in the state legislature, the town I grew up in, got elected, and had 8 years in the Florida House to work on things that were important to me, important to the people, neighbors I lived with, including you guys. Yep. And it was just an unbelievable opportunity.
Man, so cool! It's like just the American success story. I think it's so great. I've been all over the globe. I've seen a lot of countries, and I love seeing what God is doing all over the globe as well. By the way. There is nothing like home. There's nothing like America, and just the freedoms that we have here, which we can talk about too a little bit. Like foundationally, why has America been the way that America has been? And so much of it is because of what our founding fathers believed. And yes, we know they're flawed. We know the stories. But there was at heart this idea that we are created with inalienable rights, that there is not to be a despot on the throne, but there is a king in heaven who actually is the one that we submit to and who governs our lives.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. I love what you said too about, sort of who we are as Americans, right? So I was at an event the other night. It was a nonprofit CEO search, and we're meeting the two candidates, and they're like, "These are the questions, some suggested questions you can ask. Here are the things we don't think you should ask." So it's like every American. It's like, what questions can I ask? I'm going to ask those questions. Yeah, but the cool part about that is really living in a place where, you know, anything is possible. And, you know, one thing I loved about being involved in the state legislatures, I told people it's one of the last great places for public service because you can do almost anything within reason, so long as you build credibility with your colleagues, you know, bring people in grassroots, like get people involved on the issue, and then you generally live a normal life, you know, after that. You're not famous. Like, so much of politics now has become sort of fame culture.
So people aren't attacking you on social media or...
Yeah, and if they are, but it's certainly, you know, they're not following you into the restaurant. Right? You know, so it's just different. It's not fame culture. You know, I think Washington, D.C., a lot of the things have become so much fame culture in everything that we do in America. But it's one of the really cool places where you can get things done and really dig deep, which is really cool.
Yeah. So you were raised in a cop's home, and then you went to law school. Like, I mean, my favorite show, Law and Order.
Yeah, I was about to say this is
you are Law and Order. I mean,
listen, as a kid, I was like, I wanted to be Sam Waterston, right? Like, I didn't want to, like, you know, play in the NFL. I'm like, look, Sam Waterston's the man. Right?
He's our
Law
guy.
and Order. No, it's, you know, so I grew up on those stories, and, you know, what I really loved about it, right, was. And I give credit to my dad for sort of instilling this, either purposefully or just through story, right? Is, you know, the idea that there are bullies in the world. There are. We know there's evil in the world. The Bible teaches us there's evil in the world. But there are people. God puts people in place to fight against that, right? To make sure that that we balance the books, and we do that in America through the justice system, right? Like, that's how we do it. It's not perfect. Right. It's imperfect.
Yeah.
But it's what we have. So the idea of whether you're a law enforcement officer, or in my case, you know, being a prosecutor, like when I explain it to my boys, they're like, what did you do? Like, you know, I'm not going to get deep into the law with my 7-year-old, right? But I'm going to say, like, look, there's sort of like when something's wrong happens to someone, like, it's our job as a community to make sure we balance the books, right? Like, we get everything back to where it should be.
Yeah.
And the way that we do that is this way, holding people accountable, helping families understand that there's a system that's fighting for them. And I think that's, you know, those stories on the way to school, my dad would, you know, I had 30 minutes, it was a kind of a longer drive. He would share those stories, and really that's what they came down to, was something bad happened. There was somebody who got hurt, and here's how we tried to make it a little bit better.
Yeah. I love that phrase, balance the books.
Yeah.
It's almost like this idea of reconciliation, right? That is reconciliation, balancing the books, right? And that's what Christ did for us. He balanced the books by, you know, paying the price that we could never pay.
That's right. And
so that's what you're talking about. Like, in the society we have, like, hey, let's do the best we can. No, we're not Christ and we're imperfect, but can we somehow make it equitable? Can we somehow balance the books? I love that. So great way to put it. So you went to law school. You were fighting, you know, in that role as a prosecutor. You're seeing a lot of things, but in this time, where does Shannon come in the picture?
Yeah. Well, just real quick on that reconciliation, you know, interestingly, we used to refer to prosecutors as ministers of justice. Oh, wow. Like, that's because the idea was, hey, you're not supposed to be the guy who's out there to just get the guy and get a conviction. Like, that's not what this is. It's fairness. It's fundamental fairness, because sometimes somebody gets charged with a crime and you look at it and you go, they need a break. They deserve a break. Like, wow, I look at all the facts, and like what a minister would do, right, is look at it and go, well, you know, here's fairness. So I think that's really important. So I'm prosecuting cases, and I'm getting off work, you know, late 7, 8 o'clock at night. I go into our local YMCA, which is, you know, where I grew up at the Y. I learned to swim at the YMCA. And, you know, Jeff, I noticed a young lady on the ARC trainer, you know, every night around the same time. And I thought, as I usually say, I thought she looked really smart.
She looked holy.
Yes. And so I had asked my cousin I was working out with, he was a lawyer as well. I said, hey, you know, who is that? And I see her every night. You know, her name is Shannon. She's the executive director here. She runs this YMCA. And he said, you know, I think she doesn't have a lawyer on her board. I'm like, how
convenient.
How can I serve?
How can I serve? So I'll just be super candid between us, you know, folks and everyone listening to the podcast. Is, you know, that I pretended that I wanted to be on her board so that I could, you know, have an excuse to talk to her, and felt like a good idea. So
you indirectly did want to be on her board.
No, I really didn't. I
was saying to be close to her.
No, I didn't want to be on the board. I just wanted her to think I would. So she had a reason to have coffee. So, So anyway, that's what happened. So we had coffee, talk about the board. That went on for several months, by the way. Like, there's a process, to get on the board. So we went through that process. I got to the part where you almost are on the board.
Yeah.
And then I said, like, hey, will you just go have dinner with me? And then, the next day she's like, hey, we can either date or you can be on my board. I'm
Which
like,
one is it?
You're
You're like, I'll take the date, please.
Easy choice.
Just the date. So that's how that happened.
And doesn't Chris Sprowls take some kind of credit for this?
Funny. So Chris Sprowls is our local county commissioner, a good friend of mine, served with me in the legislature. So during this period of time, they were doing like a membership drive at the YMCA. So I'm calling all my buddies, like, hey, bud, like, you probably need to hit the gym, Listen, I care about you, your health. Here's the other thing. I'm really trying to go out with this girl, and she runs the Y. So it'd be awesome for me if I could deliver like 10 new memberships.
My credit goes way up.
You know what I mean? So
he's putting in work.
Yeah. So Chris Sprowls is, obviously he's just a real buddy, right? So he's like, oh my gosh, all right, well, I'll join. So he's like, he joined and he would come to the YMCA. So actually, before I became speaker, they have this process where they nominate, and Chris Sprowls is one of the guys who nominated me, and he told that story. I had that membership for like 3 years.
I was financially invested into your relationship.
He was.
Yeah. Hey, listen, but the ROI was big.
Huge.
Yeah.
ROI was huge because you now have a loving wife, 2 sons, Conrad and Prescott.
Yep, 2 boys. Yep.
And really just, this, as we transition kind of like to this fatherhood conversation, because, you saw it in the criminal justice system, right? What did you see? What was really, is there a particular story? Was there a particular stat? I mean, what really kind of put that on the radar for you in terms of the relationship between the criminal justice system and not having dad in the home?
Yeah. So, it really hit home for me when I was prosecuting gang crime. And I spent a lot of time, it sounds weird, right? I spent a lot of time with gang members, right? Because when you're prosecuting cases, yeah, sure, the defendant, the guy who did the crime, may have been a gang member, but also all the witnesses are gang members, right? Like, there's no, like, there used to be a joke, my boss at the state attorney's office at the time, he said, nobody commits a crime in front of a bus full of nuns. Right? Like, it's in front of other, potential criminals. So I would spend all this time, talking with them, and I'd be like, hey, how'd you get involved in this? And the witnesses, just like, casually, where, and I'm like, well, like I grew up in the neighborhood, and like, the guy who was the most influential guy on the block was a guy who seemed like he had success. What does that mean? Like he had money, he had status, people look up to him, and, they sort of wanted to include me. Yeah. And like, what else was I going to do? It didn't seem like, I didn't really have a vision for anything else. Right. So that really got me thinking about the role of fatherlessness and how that was playing, right? Because what are the vast majority of those individuals I was talking to have in common, right? There's no present active father in the home. And the one male role model that seemed like the one who had the answers was the one who was, sitting on the other side of the courtroom getting, 30 years in prison, right? So that's really where it started. Because I think at first, we read scripture and it talks about, God says how many times? A lot of times. Fight for the fatherless, like the widows, the orphans, the fatherless. And I think when I read that before that experience, I took that as acts of kindness. God's telling us acts of kindness, acts of kindness. And I'm not saying it's not that. Of course it is. But it's so much more than that, right? Like God's giving us a blueprint of what is going to be wrong and what is the human condition. If somebody's father is missing, we now know all of the statistics. Of what's going to happen or potentially could happen in their lives. And so I think that experience as a prosecutor really started to put faces on that for me.
So you mentioned the statistics, and we talk about them, but we don't always talk about them on the podcast. So it's a good time to kind of, just dive into a couple of them. Yeah. And one of the things that was shocking to me is that we're seeing that the United States leads the world in fatherlessness. And it's not close.
Yes.
This is bizarre to me. Like, it is not even close. So almost 25% of children growing up today are growing up without a father in the home. Whereas the average globally is 7%.
People are closer to us in the Olympics than they are in fatherlessness.
Yes.
That's how, like to really paint the picture for people.
Easily. And so, like, for instance, in atheistic Japan, like, we're supposed to be this Christian nation, right? In atheistic Japan, 7%, they're the average, are fatherless. In Hindu India, 5% are fatherless. And in Muslim Turkey, 2% are fatherless. And so when you hear those numbers as a believer, man, it's just like that. Those statistics leap out of the page, like leap off the page to me, because I think, how can we as believers, with the built-in admonition to care for the fatherless, and by the way, the built-in admonition to exalt marriage, to stay married, to love your kids, to not exasperate them. Like, we have the manual that says, and this Christian nation is doing anything but. So I think, those are some of them. A couple of other statistics which are just crazy to me. Black children are growing up, almost 50% of black children are growing up without a father in the home. And overall, single mothers head up 80% of single-parent households. While divorce is the cause for a lot of single-parent households, approximately 40% of children are born to unwed mother. And for women under the age of 30, which is mostly the people who are having babies, the demographic is 53% are born to, out of wedlock. So what is going on? Like, first of all, what is going on? But I mean, secondly, as you heard all of these statistics, like, how did they affect your decision to do what you did in the legislature, which we'll get to? But what was that motivation?
By the way, the first time I heard some of those, right, in addition to the ones that you talked about, like, look, the statistics on incarceration we talked about on time as a prosecutor, right? Exponentially more likely to be incarcerated with no present father. Exponentially more likely to commit suicide, to have a drug addiction, we talk about mental illness, or to have a mental illness. All of the terrible things we talk about in society, right? One of the leading factors, if not the leading factor, was fatherlessness. When I first saw those statistics, heard those statistics, and maybe someone's listening who that's the first time they've heard them, they're like, wait, if they had my reaction, I'll tell you what my reaction was. That can't be true. First of all, 25% of kids in America are growing up with a dad in their home. Like, that can't be right. You're telling me if you don't have a dad in your home, there's so many, right? This isn't about moms, right? Moms are, like, they're awesome.
Yeah.
They're doing the
Not
best
a
they
referendum on moms.
No, like, they're alone.
But
right?
moms
Like,
shouldn't have to
alone.
do it all alone.
Yeah, so we're looking at this problem, but you think to yourself, like, this can't be true. So then I started doing, research, right? I was a prosecutor at the time. It's like, okay, now I need evidence. You told me, now I need evidence. And what was really striking to me was, we have three guys sitting here who are, all believers. So people can chalk it up to, you have a worldview. We have a worldview based on our faith or what have you. What was interesting to me is everyone agrees. Your liberal, sort of Harvard professor.
Yeah.
I joke, there's a guy who actually, that wrote a book called The Boy Crisis, right? Warren Farrell. Warren Farrell was the former president of the National Organization of Women, which has historically been, not a conservative organization. And what was interesting to me is everyone agrees on this, and there's been all of this work lately. Melissa Kearney did a book, The Two-Parent Privilege, right? Yep. And she's an economist. She's not a social scientist. She's not a conservative or liberal. She's an economist. All of this work has been done. They all agree that not only are we the worst in the world at this, but that it's having profound impacts on individuals, which means it's having profound impacts on American society. So it was shocking to me. I first didn't believe it. And then when I decided to do the research, all I found was there's almost nobody who disagrees. Now, they might disagree on what the solution is, but they don't disagree with the existence of what the problem and its impacts in society. So when I finally got to that point, I felt like God was putting me in a position, putting it on my heart. This is something I want you to work on. I had absolutely no idea at that point, no idea what that meant or what that was.
Well, it's so pervasive. How would you fix that?
How do you boil the ocean? Right? That's what it felt like. And it took. We obviously did things, and I got to work with, Man Up along the way, and other organizations, all pro dad. So we started immersing ourselves in, okay, what's out there, what work is being done. But it probably took 6 years to get to the point where we said, all right, here's a piece of legislation that we can put forward.
Yeah. So, and one of the stories I love is that in thinking about legislation, and you become they call it the speaker designate ceremony, or whatever, your coming out party, right? Yeah. Which is basically to say, hey, this is going to be the next speaker of the House. And so there's a speech that you give. and there's a disagreement on whether or not to talk about fatherlessness, right?
That's right. Yeah. So we're writing the speech, and we've got the speech out. Everybody's sort of talking about it, and we had this paragraph or page about fatherlessness, about the boy crisis, laying out the problems, laying out some of the statistics you mentioned, and then saying like we've got to do something, we've got to tackle it. And there was disagreement. And just to sort of set the table a little bit for people who are listening, like this is around the time like Gillette had done the commercial, like kind of like that made people feel like men are bad and all these things,
toxic masculinity,
and all that kind of stuff was going on. It was really hot and heavy, and there were some folks around the table who were like, I don't think we should do this now. Right, like
political advisors going.
Yeah, I think look, and they're sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, you're going to be up there, you're going to be given this part of the speech, and it is going to be crickets. You're going to be like a man alone on an island, and it's terrible, right? Like, as you're a political person, you're like, that is the last place you want to be. And we chatted about it for a while, and somebody had said, hey, even if we were to leave this in the speech, we still have absolutely no idea what we would even do.
Yeah.
So why say it? And I think at that moment, what I responded back with was, you know what, you're right. We don't have any idea. But if we don't say it, we won't do it. Mm-hmm. Because there'll be no accountability to have to really try.
That's good.
It's like John. John Kennedy said we were going to go to the moon like 10 years before like that was really possible, right? Yeah. So it's like you have to say it in order for it to happen. But there was some heated discussion around whether we include it.
But I just love that you said it, because now it's like, okay, it's on the table and we're going to do something about it. And now it's really cool, after the fact. Now, obviously, we're still seeing how it's going to all play out. But I love that even other states are looking to Florida to say, well, hold on. If Florida could do it, like certainly we could do it as well, right?
Yeah, and I think that what was really interesting to me about sort of the evolution of talking about fatherlessness in the political space, because I don't think there was a ton of conversation about it, prior to our conversation, at least in a long time. And I remember I tested it out a couple of times with like different audiences. Like I'm around a table of CEOs, and they're like, "What's important?" You usually ask a question like, "Well, thanks for coming, Mr. Speaker. Like, tell us what's important to you that maybe we can help you with." And I'm like, "Well, thanks for asking. Here's this problem we have," and I lay it out for them, and it's like, so we're working on solution. And at the end, it really was crickets.
Yeah. It really crickets was. That you were worried about.
People don't have answers.
They're like, well, gosh, and it's almost like for some people it was awkward. Like, am I supposed to weigh in on this, or is this like socially taboo? For us to discuss? And
am I going to get canceled if I'm
going to get canceled? Yeah. And so we included in the speech what was really cool, right? And this is how God works. Is we give the speech. So many members of the legislature came up to me afterwards. Members of the different party, members of a different race, coming up and saying, "Thank you for saying that. I want to work on it. Like, I want to be part of whatever the solution is, whatever it is we do. I want to be part of it." Yeah. And that was just affirmation, right? Take a leap of faith, get the affirmation that okay, like we're going to do something. Something's gonna come out of all of this. And that was the really neat part, right? So like to have all of those people come together in a political time where we can't get anyone to agree on anything. Like, you can't get 3 Americans to agree on anything.
Yeah.
But we got 120 members of the Florida House of Representatives in a fairly sizable state in the most powerful nation on earth to agree that fatherlessness was an issue that we all care about, that we all want to find a solution for, and to put it all on the table and pass the largest piece of fatherlessness legislation in American history.
That's crazy. What a cool legacy, right?
Yeah,
like it's just so awesome. And and for me and for Man Up and All Pro Dad, like you'd mentioned, and some of those that you work with, it was a cool moment to be on the Capitol steps and see, to your point, legislators from every corner of the state and every ethnicity and race going, we agree on this. Yeah. We agree that dads matter. And you're right. Like, you go to a church committee, they're not agreeing on the carpet color, right?
Right.
And you're able to get like something as serious as fatherlessness for everyone to agree on that.
Yeah,
it's just wild.
No, it was astonishing. You were there obviously that day on the Capitol, the old Capitol steps. What a cool day, right? Like, there's people ask, hey, what was the coolest thing you ever did? And I always go back to that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I always go back to it. Part of it was, so many people, like you, Jeff, and others who, we care about this issue were there. My kid, my two boys are standing next to me. Just an amazing day. And to have all those people out there, really rallying around that. And then we end this press conference where we're talking about on the steps of the Capitol. We walk inside and unanimously pass this. It was just sort of, it's just hard to beat, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure athletes are like, what's your best moment? I was like, oh my gosh, my dad was there. I won the Super Bowl or whatever. Like for me, it was that.
Yeah, no doubt. So then the fallout of that has been that now you've got local organizations who are already doing the work, now have been able to be kind of capitalized in a sense and help to strategically scale what they're doing, put systems in place, training in place. You want to talk just a little bit about the bill?
Yeah, so part of the solution came out, hey, there are organizations that we were able to quickly identify, the Man Ups, the All Pro Dads, those folks who are in this space. And what was neat about it is there's so many, and they're all in different parts, right? Like they have different expertise. One is in public schools, one is doing adoption and foster care, church ministries. So we said, hey, this has to be a ground up. Government can't fix this. Yeah. It can't be top down. It's got to be ground up. So how do we go if Man Up was serving 100 dads in a particular area, how can we make it 500 dads? How do we start to go to these organizations and help them scale? And if they are, less sophisticated than a Man Up was or others, right? Like and they just, they're operating out of the back of a church and they just need some help. How do we train them up? So train them up, equip them, and then help them scale. So that was, half of the initiative was doing that. We put, it was a $70 million total package. I think $25 million of it was on helping these organizations scale, training them up and giving them infusions to grow. And then another half of it was we believed, look, this is also a cultural change. So in addition to the boots on the ground doing this work, whether it's with middle-class dads in schools, or dads coming out of prison, we need a cultural message that appeals to all dads or all potential male mentors. And that's where the Father First marketing campaign that we put aside really came about, which was we need to reach people where they are. Where are they? TV. They're on social media. We need to get to them and express, hey, it doesn't take necessarily a ton to be a great dad. It's about being present. Right? It's about being available. And we can help you do that. And here's how. And then we can get you to resources, depending on your situation. Maybe a Man Up is the resource that can help you be the kind of dad that you want. So that's really what the initiative was about. And we did some other things as well, making sure in the foster care system, in the child welfare system, there were fatherhood engagement specialists, people who, listen, to be honest, dads were kind of forgotten a little bit,
for sure.
In that space, right? It was we need to get dad involved. So really sort of reorienting state government, helping folks scale, and then culturally leading on a campaign that says dads matter, you're important, and man, we need you.
I think one of the questions that a lot of guys who are listening who have a church background are thinking, how does this mesh with faith? How does government and the church, you mentioned the church several times, we're a Christian organization. How do those two mesh? I thought that those were supposed to be separate, or like all of this kind of misconceptions we may have, but also just, I think, baggage, or maybe even just, man, I'd love to engage, but I'm skeptical of government, for whatever, right? Like we hear a lot of those questions, I think. So what would you say to those guys, and what is the interplay between, because fatherlessness and politics, even that interplay is kind of interesting, right? But then what about the church and state kind of tackling this together?
Yeah. So I would say that, I'm okay if churches are skeptical of the government. I think that's, we all should be skeptical of the government for a lot of reasons. I think the challenge is that government was so skeptical of the church, right? And you mentioned, about being separate. And I hear that all the time. And every time I hear it, I kind of twitch and cringe just a little bit, right? Like, the idea was separation of church and state, which really came from a letter from Thomas Jefferson writing to a preacher saying there will be a wall of separation between church and state. What he was saying was the government isn't going to come into your church and tell you how to worship, how to run your church. It wasn't that you weren't going to be invited into government. That wasn't how this was supposed to go.
Wow.
So, and I think you've seen a reorientation of that. We have Jeff, which you were part of, the governor's faith-based and community-based, group that really is there to engage churches in helping us solve the problems of society. And I think that is the orientation. Government needs to invite the church to say, hey, these are the problems we're working on. Where can you help us? Because I will say this, as somebody who, yes, is a person of faith, but has been inside government, we cannot solve these issues without the church. We cannot. We can't, practically and impractically, right? Like God tells us to use the church, right? Practically speaking, we need individuals who have a heart for the fatherless, that it's part of who they are because it's part of their faith to engage in this issue and help us solve it.
Yeah, that's been for me the biggest eye-opening thing because, and my skepticism of government over the years, and but also having now been up in Tallahassee and doing some lobbying and doing being a part of the fatherhood bill and some other legislation, and you start to see, wait a second, most of these people up here are pretty good people who are trying to do the right thing. Yeah. And that's one of the messages I try to convey everywhere. I met with our mutual friend yesterday, Mark. Yeah. Just talking about that, he said, man, I'm so glad to hear that you think that, he's a Reaganite and everything. And it's like, yeah, you know what? They're pretty good people just trying to do the right thing. And I think if we don't engage in the political process at all, we're really doing a disservice because most places in the world don't get to engage in the political process. Yeah, that's right. And we have taken it for granted, I think, that we can actually participate in how we're governed.
Yeah, there was a book, I don't know if it was John Richard Newhouse, was in the 90s, wrote a book called Naked in the Public Square. And the idea was hey, the public square is naked, right? We all agree, hey, people shouldn't be running around naked. Bad idea, right? This is the whole point of it, though. The illustration he was using was the church, people of faith, the church community is what closes would close the public square, right? So don't allow society to be naked, which means absent your moral involvement of coming in and saying hey, we want to do the right thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And by the way, and it's okay to say, I don't know yet what that is. Mm-hmm. But I want to find out. I really want to find out what the right decision is. I had a boss, my boss at the state attorney's office used to say, what's the right thing to do on this case? And it's such a recalibrating thing because you're
it's a great question.
Okay, wait a second. Let me step back and what is the right thing? Yeah. And I think that, that is where the faith-based community, right, needs to ask themselves the question, can I afford to not engage and not have my voice heard and in a way that I'm speaking moral authority and being part of that? And I would say to you, we can't. Yeah. We can't. When you've got 25% of children growing up in America without a present father in their home, it is a problem that we cannot ignore. Yeah.
When we hold the moral standing because we have where morals come from, and we just say, I'm not going to be involved, that's where the society just starts to crumble because now you have a bunch of people that don't believe that right or wrong or whatever. That's right. And they're the ones making the laws.
But it's certainly basing it off, a cultural zeitgeist or, some other thing. I mean, we see now, one of the challenges I just read was that so we're coming up on an election. We'll turn it political just a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on an election.
We need to ask that question.
And I had read that, where Trump, and listen, wherever you're going to vote, you're going to vote. I'm not trying to tell you which way to vote, although I certainly have an opinion. But Trump is losing ground or losing support among suburban women, and it's primarily over the issue of abortion. Mm-hmm. And I think it's 39% now of women. They're they are hardcore like they're saying that abortion is the single biggest issue for them. When you think about the electorate, that's
I think he's also losing some pro-lifers that say that that's their biggest issue. Yeah. And because yeah. So,
but I'm curious to know from your vantage point because I kind of wanted to take it to some amendments that we have in Florida. And the reason why I want to do this is because there's amendments on the ballot in other states. So people are tuning in and these issues come up. I think the question of, hey, how do I vote? How do I participate in this? And if nothing else, you may not think your vote counts for the president. I disagree. But if nothing else, the amendments in your state, you should be voting on those.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And to your point, I mean, there's two in particular on the ballot, 3 and 4, and I'll use 4 first because it's the abortion amendment, and I mean, essentially allows for abortion on demand. There's no restrictions on weeks. I mean, it is abortion at any time. Mm-hmm. And look, most people listening to this might be consider themselves pro-life. Some might not have an opinion, a great opinion, or some might say, "Hey, I'm pro-choice." Here's what I would say to the people, the pro-life folks. I would say, "Hey, we need your voice in this. We got a certain amount of time. Like, we need to hear your voice, and your opinion needs to be heard on what these things are." The folks who would say to themselves, "Well, I don't really like what folks have done on restricting abortion access." Here's what I would say: you look at this amendment. Most people, if you said abortion at 23 weeks, their eyebrows would go up just like yours just did, right? Like, wait, what? Or abortion at 20 weeks, people's eyebrows go like, hey, even if they consider themselves pro-choice, they're not willing to go that far, right? This amendment allows them to go that far. And I mean, so it's horrific, regardless of where you are on this issue. I listen, full disclosure, when I had the opportunity to pass a piece of legislation that protected babies up to 15 weeks, which at the time was the most legally aggressive we could be based on our law at the time. And I was proud to do that because I believe in the sanctity of life. I understand that not everybody feels that way. I really do. But surely you don't feel this way either. And so, I would say to people in the church community, like, hey, we've got to be engaged on talking about this and making people understand what it is and what it could mean for people. And then on people who maybe don't share our worldview on this particular issue, whether they're in or out of the church community, we should say, are you comfortable with going this far? And if the answer is no, then that's your answer.
And that's your answer.
And I think so. I think that is really important. And you've seen a lot of people come out and talk about this. So it is a tough issue to talk about. Yeah. Most people don't want to talk about the issue, but we have to. I mean, I remember I was doing a death penalty bill at one point because the Supreme Court had said at this one shot in time, hey, we have to have unanimous jury verdicts, otherwise there's no death penalty. So at the time we had cop killers and things like that who were on trial. So I did this bill to make sure the death penalty was legal. And I remember there was a Democrat member who I liked a lot and respected. We disagreed on almost everything, but we really liked each other. And
that's refreshing in and of itself, though.
Yeah. I really liked him. And he made a comment in committee as I was presenting the bill. He's like, I know we're not having a conversation today about life issues. And I stopped him. I say, I want you to know I invite that conversation whenever you want to have it, whether it is on abortion, whether it is on the death penalty, whether it is on how we treat pregnant mothers or the elderly. Like, if we're not having a constant conversation about how we treat human life in this country at every stage, what are we doing?
In the womb, out the womb, everything.
End of life. What are we doing here? So, this is where the church community is leading and needs to lead, is in these conversations of life. And then the other amendment is, the marijuana amendment. I think that's a conversation. Look, that's even probably more disagreement on sort of where people stand on it. But I think getting the facts and separating, fact from fiction is really important when you're making a decision that is going to be in the Constitution and is going to be in our state for a really long time.
Yeah, and I think that's I would be curious as an attorney and as someone who served in the legislature, what is the role of the Constitution in this versus a bill, like the legislature passing bills versus the populace coming in and going, oh, we're going to vote on this amendment to the Constitution. Like, what's your take on it? I'm just curious what your take is.
Yeah, it's the difference between, dating and getting married. That's the difference, right? So, you come in and you pass a law, it goes into statute. It's a big deal. Right? Like, you got to get the legislature you got to get, both chambers to agree to get rid of it. Okay, but that happens,
Yeah.
right? You come in, you do something. There's a lot of issues that we work on that are not political. They're not abortion, they're not the death penalty, they're not marijuana. Like, they're just sort of everyday issues, and there is wide agreement. But you know what? Sometimes you get it wrong. And when you get it wrong, you come back and you tweak and you fix and you play with it, because when you're trying to solve a problem, I'm sure if we brought up something, the three of us would have ideas and we'd invite other people in, and like maybe we'd get to a good place, and probably we'd look at it 6 months later and say, now that I'm looking at it 6 months later, knowing what I know now, I would tweak this and tweak this. That's lawmaking, right? So it can be undone, it can be tweaked, it can be changed every year in Florida. You put something in your Constitution, and you need 60+% of every voter that is going to show up to agree, after a long, expensive process to get there, to take it off the Constitution. It is why we have language in Florida about pregnant pigs in the Constitution. Like, I'm not saying pregnant pigs aren't an important issue.
Sure.
Probably one for the statute book, not the Constitution.
Oh, the Constitution,
right?
yeah.
So I think, you look at the U.S. Constitution, we did a lot and a lot fewer words.
Yeah.
I think there's 100,000 words plus in the Florida Constitution. The Gettysburg Address, pretty short.
Yeah.
Did a lot there. So I think lawmaking is a better path to do it. Plus, the cool thing about, living in America is, you get to, get rid of all your politicians every couple of years, right? So, like, that's what the ballot box is for, is to go like, I'm mad at you, or, I'm not mad, but I feel like the new guy is going to do it better.
Yeah.
That is what it is for. The Constitution is a really dangerous place. So it does complicate the situation.
I have a question about, knowing people, and we don't have to like keep talking about the abortion topic, but
So I'm going to keep talking about the abortion.
Well, it's a genuine question, because and I'm sure a lot of people want to know how to answer this question for their friends, or maybe some people have this. Is you have some people that are saying, if both candidates have a policy on abortion where they're okay with 6 weeks and under still getting aborted, I'm not going to vote for either party, right? And I have friends that are like in that camp. How do you typically engage in that?
You're saying they're because they're mad about the 6 weeks, or something?
Like the policy has to be no, like, abortion banned, or I don't vote for you.
There's no compromise.
Yeah,
right?
I won't.
Because in
compromise.
politics, you're compromising.
Oh, I see what you're
right?
saying.
Whereas
I understand. You're saying that it's people who are pro-life who are saying, hey, if it's not 0 abortions at any stage, I'm not going to vote for anybody. Yeah.
And you have to campaign that. You can't just hold that as a value. Like,
yeah, I by the way, I get it.
Yeah.
Like, I really do.
No, totally.
Like,
same.
I really get the urge to go, hey, like, if you can't get there on this issue, like, I'm not with you. Like, I really do respect that. Here's what I would say to them. We can't afford for you to step out. Like, we can't. I go back to the issue we just talked about, naked in the public square. It's like, you don't have to, it wouldn't have to be your decision, right? You would do it different. I get that. Would you prefer it at a shorter period of time, or would you prefer an Amendment 4 where an abortion could happen at 22 weeks? Yeah. I think the answer to that question is going to be pretty clear to them, right? So we need your voice. Like, we need you. Like, we can't have you get off the field in this fight. So I think that my plea to them, not even encouragement, a plea to them would be stay engaged, get your voice heard. By all means, express your viewpoint about that. And I would say the same thing, by the way, to people who don't agree with my worldview, who'd say, hey, I thought, 6 weeks was too aggressive or what have you, but I don't like this amendment that lets it. I hear you. I don't agree, but I got you. Like, I understand what your feelings are. So by all means, engage in the process. But we need people's voice on this. And, this amendment is morally abhorrent. It is, and I say that I think most people would agree on the facts that it is, and we need people's voice. We need the faith-based community's voice, and we can't have people go, you know what, I'm just not going to engage at all. While I get the urge, I need you.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the Faith Council, one of the members was Senator Stargell, and she was a stay-at-home mom who, I believe, if she hears this, you can correct me. We'll do a fact check later. But I don't believe she had a college degree. I mean, she graduated from high school, but I don't believe she had a college degree. And she was very passionate about this issue, right, of abortion. And so she ends up, friends say, hey, you should run for office. She does. She gets elected, and there she's the one who's responsible, at least in part, for the 15-week ban. And she, in talking with us, she was saying, and then Florida got it down to 6.
Yeah.
And I believe she was in part of that discussion. And she said, you would not believe the answer I'm getting from the people on the right who are saying it's a 0 or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I am just like, I don't know what to do. She's like, I understand what they're saying, like morally, but I am dealing with a lot of people who don't want this to happen.
Yeah.
And to get to a compromised like position, and to her point, isn't 6 better than 15? Isn't 15 better than 24?
Yeah.
Right. And so as I was looking and doing some research, what is, if 4 were to pass, what is the expectation? And it's obvious there's going to be a lot more abortions in the state, to the point where, it becomes a financial issue for us. Who's actually paying for it? But then just, the moral piece of it, you end up losing a lot more people. And I think the devaluing of marriage is at the root of a lot of this, right? That when you don't value marriage, and we've made it really easy to get divorced now in our culture, those are all issues.
And all that.
Yeah. And so in the very rare instances, and there are those instances of the mother, right? Like the life of the mother, the baby can't survive outside of the womb if the water breaks. So there's some issues. They're just very rare. They're very rare. And most of it is about personal autonomy, quite frankly. Yeah. But we spend our time talking about the exceptions instead of talking about like, hey, what's really going on here? Mm-hmm. And what's really going on is that we've lost our moral way. We've lost our compass, right? That's right? And we have to be bold to at least talk about these issues respectfully. Yep. And I think that's what I hear you talking about is that, in your time in the legislature, you had those, hey, we disagree, but I can still view you as a human.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I'm not going to devalue your innate inherent worth in front of God, right? As an image bearer of God. But let's talk about the issues. So I'd love to hear just if you could pull back the curtain a little bit. Yeah. What is life like, serving in the legislature? Are there any crazy stories? You don't have to give specifics, but like how do laws get made? What are the twists and turns that happen? I mean, just pull back the curtain for us.
You don't really want to know. No, I mean, listen, it is a very human process. Like even the things you talked about where, Senator Stargell and, the Senator now Senator Grahl, Representative Grahl at the time had done the bill on the other side, the 15 weeks. Those are, wildly heroic women who have a very pure view of that issue, and yet we're willing to really take it on from all sides.
Yeah,
everybody. To try to figure out like what's the right thing to do here. And then when we pass the 15 weeks, I think that there's a lot of those people who are willing to have courage. One phrase I had heard at one point, and I've used it ever since, was, maybe most days I've got courage. On the days I don't, I'll borrow it from you.
That's good.
Right. And I think whether you're in an organization like Man Up, or you're in a church, in a faith-based situation, or you're the military, or you're serving in the legislature, like there's this opportunity when you get to collaborate with people who are like-minded, who believe in the mission, that I'm going to try to have courage most days, but if I don't, I can borrow it from you.
Yeah, that's good.
And use it on this. And I think that was one of the things I saw a lot was, being able to bring along your colleagues on different things and then let them bring you along on some other things that maybe you just weren't there yet. Yeah. And so it was a really cool thing and a really, fascinating time. And I think people get that experience when they engage in something that is mission critical. Yeah. Somebody shows up. I've been to, the Man Up 100 when you do the breakfast, and then you invite, men from the community to come in and say, hey, this is what we need you to do. Yeah. This is your charge. Mm-hmm. And that is mission critical. And I think when people have the opportunity where they feel like they are part of something really important, if we came in here today and say, hey guys, the alien invasion, end of the world, we're arming up and we're going. Everyone's like, all right, like this is it. What choice do I have, right? Yeah. It's very clear, like what we're doing, right? Yeah. That's why Independence Day is a great movie. And but similarly, we have these issues that they're really not political, right? Like I understand the political nature of something like abortion or marijuana, right? But like when we're talking about fatherlessness, there are those issues that are critical that I think sometimes don't get the attention because there's so much other stuff going on that might be also important, right?
Yeah.
Life is wildly important. What is there other than life? But there's these other things, and for us to also talk about. And so when I got to work on fatherlessness, we did the largest initiative in America to tackle literacy, New World's Reading Initiative, which to this now has 275,000 Florida children.
Wow.
Who are getting now the most robust initiative in America to learn to read on grade level. That matters, right? That matters. And, those are issues where you have members of the legislature, members of the community who care about them, who want to do something, who want to have an impact. And those are, I think, a lot of the issues, a majority of the issues. And the issues that are wildly controversial, fine, let's sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk about it. And let's see where we can get. Yeah. But these other things need to get done.
Yeah. So on one of the amendments to vote on is the right to fish and hunt. Now, how are you voting on that one?
The right to, I believe in you.
The right to fish and hunt.
You should be able to fish and hunt.
Okay, because you won a lot of people over.
Yeah. Fishing and hunting, you got to be able to.
Or lost.
Yeah.
No, I think our audience is primarily
Hunt what?
Yeah,
is what people are going to ask.
Yeah.
I saw that on there. I'm like, really? We don't have a right to
hunt what?
Yeah, fish and hunt here. So. Well, listen, man, Chris, it's been just great having you on the podcast today and get to hear your heart about a plethora of issues. I think engaging in politics is, for some people, it's like that's all it is. It's like, politics. Like, we got to do this or we're going to lose the country. And to those people, I'm like, well, no, God's on the throne. Like, we're okay. But then there's people who are like, I have been, which is more like, man, they're all corrupt. I'm not, whatever. I'm not even going to engage. And I think you've given us some words to think about today regarding that. So we appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate that. My counsel would still be spend more time at church or the baseball field or places you don't know people's political affiliation. Yeah. You'll live longer, but we need you.
Awesome.
Amen.
Thank you guys.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on the Patros Podcast as we are embracing healthy masculinity. And thank you, Chris, for joining us today.
You guys appreciate it.
See you guys soon.
All right.